Hello, everyone. So I am going to get right to it, and I want to start by introducing you to my great-grandmother, my Jewish, Turkish great-grandmother, Miriam. She was really quite young, still just a girl when she married my great-grandfather. They wound up having 8 children. She was really quite lovely. She loved to dance, and she could read fortunes in coffee grounds, like I'm sure maybe many of your grandmothers, the folks in Turkey, did as well. She loved to dance, as I mentioned. She read the coffee grounds, and really she was quite a petite woman. She had light brown, wavy hair, light hazel eyes, and she was quite small, under 5 feet tall. But you really shouldn't be mistaken, because there was nothing even remotely fragile about my great-grandmother, Miriam. In 1901, my great-grandmother immigrated with an already aging husband and 6 very small children from Smyrna to Buenos Aires, Argentina. She did this fleeing war. Smyrna at that time was Turkey one day, Greece the other, really just depending on how the war was going. Once she made the journey with her family, it's not that things magically got easy when they settled down in Buenos Aires. They did not at all. And my great-grandmother Miriam did all manner of things to keep her family afloat. She took in other people's laundry, and she even helped prepare corpses for burial at the local synagogue for extra money. Miriam's life and the lives of her children were full of risk and uncertainty every day. But she embraced it, and she embraced it above all with a brilliant sense of humor and a genuine joy for life, really frequently dancing on the tables to entertain her sometimes hungry children. Now, a generation later, on the other side of the world, in Alexandria, Egypt, so really about as far away as you could get from my now Argentine Jewish family, my 16-year-old Egyptian father boarded a merchant ship, went to work, and set sail for New York City. He had no formal education at this point, and he was illiterate when he left Egypt. He learned to read and write, but in English, never in his native Arabic. There was no war to drive my 16-year-old father to assume this kind of risk. Simply a want, a desire, a need for something better. And it really could be said that roughly 10 years later, no one in my family, or that this risk was quite possibly the biggest anyone in my family has ever taken. And it is when my Egyptian Muslim father asked my Argentine Jewish mother out on a date. Risks come in all shapes and sizes, and every one of them has the potential to transform your reality. Now, my existence, as you can see, is genuinely only possible in every way because the people before me assumed all manner of risk, need-based, driven by fear, fueled by passion, and sometimes, to be honest, even just for fun. But if you think about it, the truth is the same is probably true for you. The risks may change in form, but they really don't change in function. At the end of the day, risk is what drives us forward. It sets the course for all of our futures, and it's present every day, everywhere. There's really no way around it. And the way that we engage with risk, the way that we view it, whether we see it as something to fear or something to get excited about, really can have a pretty massive impact on your life. So, my family's stories exist really in the context of a great deal of uncertainty. And the truth is that made it a lot easier for them to embrace risk, right? They needed to. They had to. In order to move the arc forward, they had to do these things. That's really different for you and me sitting here in Geneva. It's much harder for us. Well, it is. It's much harder for us to take chances, right? We process potential gain and potential loss quite differently, and we don't need to do those things. But there's a value to it. It's important. And I have a few tips, a few ways in which I channel, let's say, my family's risk-taking DNA that have helped me, and I'm going to share them with you now. So hopefully they're helpful. And the first one is, and I think you've heard this a couple of times already today, it's, I think, a universal guidance, but in the context of risk as well. And that one is, be grateful. Every risk has an inherent opportunity built into it. It's part of its DNA. And when something magical happens, do it. Go for it. I genuinely believe that the substance, the fabric of our lives, is made up of those things that we earn. The things that we work for, that we prepare for, and that we strive for. But if that's the substance of life, then the magic is those things that we seemingly have no business doing. And when those things, the unexpected, the unanticipated, the wow, how did I wind up there, approaches you, recognize it as something magical, because it doesn't happen to everyone in the same way every day. So when I was 15 and living in New York City, I one day found myself in Charles de Gaulle alone. I was actually returning home from a vacation visiting my family in Egypt. And while I was sitting in transit in Charles de Gaulle, it suddenly occurred to me that right outside those doors was Paris. And I was a 15-year-old American, and so my only points of reference, admittedly, were the Eiffel Tower and the Mona Lisa. But that was lure enough, and I grabbed my suitcase and I headed for the city center. Now, as soon as I got there, I had to call my father, my Egyptian father in New York, and tell him of my very rational decision. Daddy, I'm going to seize the moment and go see the Eiffel Tower and the Louvre. Now, it took my father a full 48 hours to get to Paris to get me. The first day he spent in genuine denial, disbelief that his little princess was doing such a thing. And the other day, well, he had to cross the Atlantic to get me. So 2 days, and 2 days was all I had. But you know, it was plenty of time to see both the Eiffel Tower and the Mona Lisa. Now, you may be sitting there thinking that's just impulsive, but to think of seizing a moment as only impulsive doesn't do it justice. It's about more than that. It's about recognizing a special moment has appeared in your life. So when a door you were not expecting suddenly appears and opens just for you, go through it and be grateful. My second tip is get over yourself. It's really easy for us to get concerned and to start thinking about all of the potential negative implications of a failure. What happens if I fail? It's really so easy for us in the context, again, of our safe and secure worlds to overestimate these potential risks and the failure. When I was first invited to come here and speak to you, my very first response was one of excitement, honestly. I thought, wow, what a terrific opportunity to share and engage. What a privilege. That's wonderful. And that feeling really quickly dissipated into panic, full-blown panic, when I realized, oh my God, what happens if I make a fool out of myself? What happens if I fail and deliver a terrible talk? And really what I had to do, and do quickly, was understand that I'm just not really that important. I'm not. The world and the people around us move on to things very quickly. And even if I came here and gave a terrible talk, really bad, more than likely you, my audience, would be on to something else by tomorrow. Right? So get over yourself. It will make you bolder, and that's very much a good thing. My third tip is don't see life as a chessboard. And this may seem obvious, but I think we need to be told this all of the time. So at work, we build predictive models. We analyze supply chain volatility. We look ahead and try to assess every possible scenario and counteraction from our competitors, etc. Now, this is very much the right way to approach work, but it is the wrong way to approach life. The truth is that the variables involved in a life are simply too enormous for us to be able to calculate. There is no way to effectively build that predictive model. You can't do it. So don't try. And I have a story here too. So when I was 19, I fell in love, and it was teenage love. So it was this the world is going to end kind of love. I'm sure you all remember. You all remember that love. In my case, he was from northern rural Portugal, very conservative and very Catholic. And he came with an even more conservative and Catholic mother, whose job it was for me to try and please. Now, since I was the Jew, Muslim, infidel American trying to steal her little boy, you can imagine that this was a monumental task. And 19-year-old me embraced it as much as I could, and I learned fluent Portuguese, and I was baptized a Catholic. Yes, complete with Sunday goings to confession. But we can talk about that after the talk. Now, probably not surprisingly, this relationship did not last, but my adventures in Catholicism had two very important unintended consequences. Number one, 16 years later, when I applied for the job at the company where I currently work, the job that years later would actually in a lot of ways bring me to you, the fact that I spoke fluent Portuguese was a really valuable skill set. It wasn't the only thing that got me hired, but it really did play a very important role in getting me the job that I now have. And the second unintended and potentially really important unintended consequence is if there is a Messiah, if there happens to be one, whoever he is, Jew, Muslim, Catholic, my bases are covered and I am good to go. Come the end of days. Life is not a chessboard. It just isn't. And one of the genuinely beautiful things about it is its ability to continually surprise us. So don't fight that. Don't see life as a chessboard. And my last tip is know your own value. So I trust in the relationships that I build every day. I work hard at them. And I know that my value as a girlfriend, as a sister, as a friend, as a colleague, as an employee are not defined by my missteps. Not at all. I work hard at and take those relationships seriously every day. And because of that, I should be rewarded. And the strength of those relationships should allow me the ability to color outside the lines every once in a while and survive that. I'm generally pretty good at my job, generally pretty good at it. I'm valuable to my employer and to my colleagues, and that gives me freedom to maybe not, sometimes say what isn't the very popular opinion to express, or maybe just once in a very rare while go around the hierarchy instead of fully respecting it. Not all the time, just once in a very rare while. Have faith, right, in the relationships and the life that you foster, and you will be rewarded because every risk exists in the context of a broader reality. And if you've done your job in that reality, you deserve to be rewarded. So these are my tips to make you a little bit bolder. Be grateful, get over yourself, don't see life as a chessboard, and know your own value. But we started with my great-grandmother Miriam, and I would like to bring you back to my family for a moment just to close that circle for you. I never knew my great-grandmother Miriam, but her youngest son, David, was my grandfather, and I knew her through him. He made sure that I knew all of my family stories. He was very vital, he was instrumental in helping my parents create the very safe and secure world in New York City that has been my launching pad, the launching pad for all of my adventures and frequently misadventures. And so I'd kind of like to introduce you to him here as we close as well as I close. My grandfather David had my great-grandmother's hazel eyes, and he was a passionate and animated storyteller. He could dance a tango that would break your heart, and he had a little bit of a weakness for Scotch whiskey, to tell the truth. He was also by far the greatest salesman I have ever encountered. And his formal education in Buenos Aires ended when he was 11, and his father died and he needed to go to work. And my grandfather had 2 jobs in his youth, both at the same time. During the day, he sold fruit at a street stall. And in the evening, he sold candy in the Grand Theater in downtown Buenos Aires. Both jobs really things that he carried with him throughout his life, because in the theater, he acquired an extraordinary love of literature, eventually building a beautiful library in our home in Buenos Aires. As for the street stall, well, that meant the family had fruit, because when the fruit was just past slightly too ripe to sell, right, just a little bit rotten, the owner of the street stall would let my grandfather take that fruit home to his family. And it's remarkable, but the truth is, until the day that my grandfather died, even accompanied by the most expensive wine or the most exclusive Scotch whiskey, my grandfather only liked bananas that were slightly rotten. They reminded him of his happy childhood. When he wasn't working as a young man, because my grandfather too was a risk taker, and when he wasn't working, my grandfather was busy trying to stow away on ships in the port of Buenos Aires. He wanted to see the world. And he started doing this when he was 14, and he did so very unsuccessfully the vast majority of the time, being thrown off of ships before they even left the harbor. But he did succeed twice, making it all the way as a stowaway to Colombia and Brazil. And he was very proud of those moments. Now, when I was a young girl and assuming all manner of risk and maybe doing some things that seem a little bit crazy, my grandfather reacted in exactly the way that you would expect a man who had spent his whole life seeking out the unknown would. He freaked out completely. He screamed, he yelled, he tried to forbid me, he worried about my safety, he scolded me, he reprimanded me, he was worried about me. Now, I usually did it anyway, and when it was over and I was safe, I knew, I could see in his eyes that my grandfather was proud of me. He was exceptionally proud of me. He was frequently prouder of my failures than he was of my successes. The successes he knew would come, the resultant part of the world he'd helped build for me, right? A university education and being in New York. But he knew that ultimately the size and scope of those successes, and maybe more importantly, the impact that they would have on my life and the life of those around me, would really come from my willingness to embrace risk and the potential failure that came along with it. And he saw that as making me brave. And in his eyes, that bravery was noble because it connected me. It connected me from New York City to the people who came before me and to the broader world around me. So the bonus tip for the day comes directly from my grandfather, David. Be proud of yourself every time you embrace a risk, regardless of the outcome. Thank you.